Have you ever felt truly wronged? Like, so wronged that every fiber of your being wanted to fight back, but you felt completely powerless? Or maybe the opposite, have you ever been at the peak of your power and used that power to walk all over someone else? Maybe you've even been a bystander, thinking, not my problem, while injustice happened right in front of you. Well, get ready for a story that'll make your blood boil, a story that pushes the limits of injustice and power. But let me tell you up front, this isn't your typical story. This is a full-blown critique of the system, a mirror held up to the dark side of humanity. And believe me, the hero of this story is way more than you might think. You definitely don't want to miss this. The day I walked into that police station, I looked like just another civilian. I was wearing a dark shirt and jeans, my long black hair pulled back in a ponytail. Nobody even glanced my way. I guess they figured, just another complaint. Little did they know, I was Lily Moore, the newly appointed police chief, and this was day one of my undercover operation. I approached the front desk. A burly, cold-eyed officer named Jake Turner looked up from his computer screen without bothering to make eye contact, and grunted, "What do you need?" His voice was so arrogant, so condescending, it made my stomach churn. But I kept it cool. "I'm here to report a theft," I said calmly. Jake finally looked up, narrowing his eyes as he sized me up. He let out a mocking laugh, loud enough that the other officers nearby turned to look. "Another one, huh?" he said. "Let me guess, it's phone or purse." "Forget it, lady. Those things never turn up." I locked eyes with him. "You're required to take my report," I stated. My voice was still calm, but firm. That firmness seemed to irritate Jake even more. He stood up, grabbed the coffee cup on his desk, and moved closer to me. The other officers were watching, but none of them dared to intervene. Some even looked down, pretending to be busy, though their uneasy expressions gave them away. Jake lowered his voice, making it menacing. "Look," he said, "people like you should know their place. We've got more important things to deal with. We don't have time for petty stuff. Got it?" Before I could even respond, Jake flicked the coffee cup, splashing the scalding liquid right in my face. The sound of the coffee hitting my skin and dripping onto my shirt cut through the silence. I flinched, stepping back, one cheek stinging from the heat. But I didn't break eye contact. In that moment, the entire precinct was staring at me. Some with pity, some with helplessness. But not a single one of them spoke up. Jake, as if nothing had happened, went back to his desk, sat down, and resumed his work. "Consider that a lesson," he said, his voice ice cold. "Now get lost." I wiped my face with my hand, feeling everyone's eyes on me. But I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to give Jake the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I took a deep breath. "Thank you," I said, quietly but firmly. "You've shown me exactly how things work around here." I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the silence of the precinct. In that moment, a fire of anger, of rebellion, ignited within me. But this anger wouldn't weaken me, it would make me stronger. As I walked briskly down the hallway, coffee dripping from my chin, Jake's words echoed in my mind. But those words, rather than making me angry, strengthened my resolve. Because Jake had crossed the line. He had really crossed the line. The door at the end of the hallway opened. A middle-aged man with a composed demeanor stood there. It was Deputy Chief Thomas Wright, one of the few people who knew my true identity in advance. "Are you all right, Chief?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice colder than usual. "You heard everything, right?" Thomas nodded, his eyes heavy with understanding. "I wanted to intervene, but you insisted on seeing things for yourself, without your identity being revealed." I undid my hair tie, letting my long black hair fall, partially concealing my reddened cheek. "I needed to see it," I said. My voice was calm, but there was a restrained anger beneath it. I needed to see how this system truly operates when no one knows who I am. Meanwhile, Jake Turner was leaning back in his worn swivel chair, completely oblivious, enjoying his little kingdom. For him, it was just another day at the office, a place where he could throw his weight around and look down on everyone. Jake had been at this precinct for over 15 years. He hadn't risen through the ranks because of his merit, but because of his power and connections. In his youth, he'd been an idealistic officer who believed justice could change the world. But after his parents were murdered during a robbery, and the perpetrators were never caught, his faith was shattered. He no longer believed in justice, only in power, a power he could control, a power that could protect him. He'd built a network of alliances in the precinct, based on fear and intimidation. He'd cow young officers and force his former superiors to cover up his misdeeds, all to avoid trouble for themselves. But there was one thing Jake didn't know. His arrogant complacency had led him to make the biggest mistake of his life. He had messed with a woman far more powerful than himself, me. Standing in front of the mirror in my new office, I washed the coffee off my face. The cold water soothed the burning sensation, but it couldn't extinguish the fire of anger within me. I took a deep breath and dried my face. My eyes regained their usual sharp, determined expression. "Get all officers into the briefing room, immediately," I told Thomas, who was standing nearby. Thomas nodded silently. He didn't ask any questions. A few minutes later, the briefing room was full. Officers filed in one by one. Jake came in last, with his usual air of indifference. He took a seat at the back of the room, crossed his arms, and wore that smug smirk of his. When I entered, the room fell silent. Nobody recognized me. But as I placed my leather briefcase on the table, straightened my posture, and looked everyone in the eye, things started to change. Some officers seemed to sense that something was different. "Good morning," I began. My voice was firm and authoritative. "I understand you've had an eventful start to your day. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Lily Moore. And as of today, I'm your new chief of police." The room went ice cold. Jake froze in his seat. That smug smirk vanished, replaced by a look of shock and unease. "No way," he muttered, but I heard him. I locked eyes with him. My voice was like ice. "Yes, Jake Turner. I'm very much looking forward to working with you." The other officers exchanged uneasy glances. No one dared to speak. The tension in the room was palpable, like a bomb about to explode. "I've been observing this precinct for the past 2 weeks," I continued, my eyes scanning the room. "I've seen how you operate when you think no one's watching. And let me be blunt, there's a lot that needs to change." Jake gulped. He was trying to appear calm, but he was failing. Deep down, he knew the game had changed. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't in control. The heavy silence in the meeting room deepened after Lily Moore introduced herself. Despite the clarity and strength in her voice, no one spoke. The officers avoided her gaze, except for a few who stole furtive glances at Jake Turner. Jake sat motionless, his hands gripping the arms of his chair tightly. He tried to mask the anger boiling inside him with a calm facade, but the tension on his face betrayed him. When the meeting ended, the officers quietly left the room. Jake was left alone. Chris Meyer, a young, newly assigned officer, hesitated at the door. His eyes darted toward Jake. A sense of injustice stirred within him, but he didn't dare speak. Chris knew Jake's power within the precinct all too well. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" Jake suddenly spoke, startling Chris. "Sorry, what did you say?" Chris asked, trying to hide his nervousness. Jake stood up and approached Chris. His eyes were like daggers. "Who does she think she is?" "Someone from the outside, who knows nothing about how things work here," spouting off. "She won't last long, you'll see." Chris just nodded and quickly walked away. He couldn't bear to face Jake any longer. But deep down, he felt a growing unease. The atmosphere in the precinct changed immediately after the meeting. Whispers spread through the hallways. Some officers wondered who Lily was, how she got the job, and whether she was truly fit to lead. But mostly, silence prevailed. It was a silence everyone understood, the silence of fear and caution. Jake, on the other hand, maintained his usual air of indifference. He was confident that Lily wouldn't last long in this environment. Jake knew the power dynamics in the precinct better than anyone, and he was a master at using them to his advantage. At the other end of the precinct, Chris Meyer sat at his desk, torn between anger and fear. He knew Jake's influence and what he was capable of doing to protect his position. But deep down, he felt that staying silent would only make things worse. But this time, things were different. Jake realized that Lily wasn't an easy target. She wasn't like the previous superiors who were willing to compromise to keep the peace. Lily was a real threat to Jake's methods and the power network he had built over the years. Chris couldn't stop thinking about Lily and the events in the meeting room. He'd sensed a determination, a resolve in her that he hadn't seen in other leaders. But he also felt the isolation she was facing. The whispers continued. Some officers thought Lily would break quickly, while others remained neutral, waiting to see how things would unfold. "What do you think? Does she stand a chance?" Jeff, a middle-aged officer who tended to avoid conflict, asked Chris. They were on patrol together in the afternoon. Chris shrugged. "I don't know, but she seems serious." Jeff laughed derisively. "Serious? Being serious just makes you a target faster around here." Chris remained silent. He knew Jeff wasn't entirely wrong. He felt trapped between two forces, his dissatisfaction with Jake and his fear that his career would be ruined if he spoke out. Lily Moore stood by the window of her new office, gazing out at the gray sky. A light rain was falling. The drops tapped gently against the glass, forming small rivulets, as if telling a complex story. Inside, the dim light of her desk lamp illuminated stacks of thick files. But Lily's mind wasn't here. It had drifted to the past, to a memory that was both her greatest motivation and her heaviest burden. Lily had grown up in a poor neighborhood. Her greatest inspiration was her grandmother, Evelyn Moore. Evelyn was a relentless social activist. She always said, "Justice isn't something that's handed to you, Lily. You have to fight for it, piece by piece, you have to take it." There was one memory etched in Lily's mind, Evelyn being pushed to the ground by a police officer, simply for demanding justice. Evelyn's teachings and actions had shown Lily that to create change, she had to enter the system and work from within. Lily had dedicated her life to that promise. After graduating from college with a degree in criminal justice, she joined the police force, starting at the bottom. Her early days on the force were grueling. Male colleagues often dismissed her, seeing her as a weak woman, unfit for the job. But Lily didn't give up. She worked hard, she learned, and she proved herself. One of the people who noticed Lily was a veteran officer, Raymond Harris. Harris, with over 30 years of experience, was respected for his intelligence and vast knowledge. He became Lily's mentor, teaching her how to handle complex cases, how to withstand pressure, and most importantly, how to maintain her principles in a system riddled with compromise. "Lily, this profession isn't perfect," Harris had once told her. "But if you keep a cool head and a warm heart, you can make a difference." With Harris's guidance, Lily rose quickly through the ranks. She was assigned to major cases and recognized as one of the most promising officers in the department. But then, everything changed. During an internal investigation, Lily came across a shocking truth. Harris's name appeared in a series of documents linked to corruption. He had taken bribes from an organized crime syndicate to overlook critical evidence. Lily didn't want to believe it. But when she confronted Harris, he didn't deny it. "You don't understand, Lily," Harris said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. This system will crush you if you don't learn to play by its rules. Harris's confession devastated Lily more than anything else ever had. She had seen him as a second father, someone she trusted unconditionally. But now, he was just another part of the system Lily was fighting to change. Instead of giving up, Lily took it as a painful lesson. She understood that she could never compromise, no matter what. Years of challenges and triumphs had made Lily not only an exceptional police officer but also a respected leader. When she was appointed police chief, she knew it was her chance to fulfill the promise she had made to herself and to Evelyn. But she also knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. People like Jake Turner represented everything Lily had to fight against. They weren't just individuals abusing their power. They were the products of a system that had supported and protected them for years. Jake Turner sat motionless in his small office. The harsh light of the fluorescent lamp illuminated his face. Despite the weariness etched on his features, his usual arrogance remained. His hand gripped the edge of his desk tightly. His eyes were fixed on the medals and certificates from years past hanging on the wall. He seemed to be trying to extract some meaning from what he once called a career. Jake Turner had once been a passionate officer, filled with ideals of protecting justice. But after his parents' tragic death during a robbery, and the failure to catch the perpetrators, his faith in the justice system was shattered. Jake had joined the police force not to uphold justice, but to gain control and protect himself. Over time, he became bitter and cynical. He used his power to dominate and manipulate others. For Jake, justice no longer existed. Only power could ensure his survival. His moral decay turned him into a tyrant, fostering a culture of fear within the precinct. Young officers like Chris Meyer felt powerless against him. As Jake climbed the ranks, he no longer saw his job as a responsibility, but as a tool to consolidate his power. The medals on his wall were largely the result of covering up misconduct or taking credit for the work of others. Jake believed he was doing what was necessary. In his view, his harshness and authoritarianism were the only way to maintain order. But this approach alienated his morally upright colleagues and created an environment of fear within the precinct. Young officers like Chris Meyer looked at him with a mixture of resentment and fear, but none dared to challenge him. In the early days of his abuse of power, Jake had felt some pangs of conscience. But over time, that feeling disappeared. He convinced himself that everything he did served a greater purpose, maintaining order and protecting himself from any threat. Acts of violence and discriminatory behavior, in his eyes, had become a necessary part of the job. Lily Moore's arrival reignited Jake's greatest fear, losing control. He saw Lily not just as a new leader, but as the embodiment of everything he despised: faith in justice and the system. For Jake, Lily wasn't a reformer, she was a threat determined to destroy everything he had built. "If she wants a fight, I'll show her," Jake muttered to himself, a cold smile spreading across his face. She messed with the wrong person. But deep down, Jake knew that Lily wasn't like the others he had dealt with before. She wasn't someone who could be easily manipulated or subdued. And that unsettled him more than anything. Escalating tension and initial moves. Jake Turner walked through the precinct hallway with his usual air of confidence. After a recent conversation with a colleague, he felt secure, believing that nothing in this system could shake his hold on power. But at the end of the hallway, his steps slowed. He noticed officers gathering quietly outside the large conference room. Jake frowned. An unscheduled meeting. This was unusual. Suspecting it might be a power move by Lily Moore, Jake entered slowly, taking a seat at the far end of the table, implying that no one could force him to do anything he didn't want to do. The atmosphere in the conference room was heavy, almost suffocating. Officers whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. A few glanced at Jake, but none dared to speak. Chris Meyer sat near the door, nervously fidgeting with a pen in his hand. He felt like something big, something that could change everything, was about to happen. the conference room door opened, and Lily entered. She wore a pristine police uniform, her newly minted badge gleaming on her chest. Her presence instantly silenced the room. Standing tall, she surveyed everyone in the room with her gaze. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. "I know you're wondering why we're here today. Let me be clear." Lily stepped to the head of the table, placed her hands on it, and looked directly at Jake. "My name is Lily Moore, and I am your new chief of police." The room froze for a few seconds. A couple of officers let out quiet, involuntary sounds of shock. Chris's eyes widened, fixed on Lily in disbelief. Jeff, the middle-aged officer sitting nearby, was motionless, but a glimmer of hope mixed with astonishment brightened his expression. At the far end of the table, Jake Turner instinctively clenched his jaw. His eyes blazed with anger. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to appear composed, but the rigid tension in his posture gave him away. A wave of irritation surged within him. This was not what he had anticipated. A woman, just a woman, had dared to walk in and threaten the foundation of everything he had built. Lily allowed the reactions to settle before continuing. "I'm not here to make friends with everyone," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I'm here to ensure that this precinct operates as it should, serving the community, not protecting the personal power of any individual." Jake let out a derisive laugh, loud enough for Lily to hear. "You think you can change anything here?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Lily turned her gaze to him, her eyes like daggers. "I don't think, Jake," she said. "I know." Taking a deep breath, Lily placed a thick folder on the table. "This is the first step in my reform plan," she announced, her eyes scanning the room. "This isn't a purge. It's an opportunity for everyone to start doing things the right way." She opened the folder, revealing a detailed list of the changes she intended to implement: mandatory ethics training, a restructured process for handling citizen complaints, and the establishment of an independent internal oversight unit. "I will not tolerate abuse of power or any form of injustice in this precinct," Lily declared, her voice unwavering. "If you have something to hide, you'd better come forward now. If you don't, I will find it." Her words weren't a threat, they were a promise. Everyone in the room could feel it. Some officers lowered their heads, visibly uneasy. Others, like Chris, felt a flicker of hope, a hope that this precinct could finally become a better place to work. Jake leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes. He studied Lily as if sizing up an adversary. Her words had only fueled his hatred. He didn't see her initiative as an opportunity, but as the greatest threat to his power he had ever faced. He stood up, casting a challenging glance at Lily. "You can say whatever you want, Jake," he said, his voice calm but brimming with defiance. "But in the end, you'll see, this system isn't as easy to change as you think." Lily's gaze didn't waver. "Then I guess we'll see who's right, Jake." Jake walked out of the conference room, not in defeat, but with something darker brewing in his mind, a new plan taking shape, a plan to bring Lily Moore down before she had a chance to deliver on her promises. Jake Turner slammed the door to his office behind him. The echo startled a few colleagues nearby, who turned to look, but no one dared to say anything. The atmosphere in the precinct felt like an overstrung wire, ready to snap at any moment. Jake, his face dark with anger, slumped into his chair. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on the medals hanging on the wall. He felt like everything he had built in his career was being threatened by Lily Moore. She doesn't just want to change the system, Jake thought. She wants to destroy it. Jake knew Lily wouldn't be taken down easily. But he also recognized her vulnerability, her newness. A new leader without enough time to establish trust was an easy target for disgruntled individuals. That evening, Jake convened a small group of officers he believed were loyal to him. These were officers who had worked under him for years, some coerced into allegiance, others willingly siding with him out of fear of losing the privileges he had helped them obtain. "Listen," Jake said, his voice low and authoritative. "She's not here to help this precinct. She's here to turn us all into pawns for her so-called reform agenda. Tell me, who here hasn't made mistakes? If she starts digging, none of us will walk away unscathed." Jeff, a reserved senior officer, hesitated before speaking. "But Jake, she said this is an opportunity for everyone to start fresh. She's not targeting anyone." Jake narrowed his eyes at Jeff, his tone dropping to a menacing whisper. "Do you believe that? Do you believe she'll leave us alone? Trust me, when she needs a scapegoat to make an example, it'll be us. Every single one of us, in this room." Jake's words sowed seeds of vague fear among the officers. They didn't entirely trust him, but they lacked the courage to defy him. Their silent acquiescence was all Jake needed. The next morning, Jake began executing his plan. He took every opportunity to undermine Lily in conversations with colleagues, emphasizing her lack of understanding of how the system worked and accusing her of trying to tear it down instead of building it back up. "She doesn't know anything about how we operate here," Jake said to a group of officers during a break. "She thinks a few reform plans will change anything. It's naive." But Jake didn't stop at internal manipulation. He reached out to Mark Callaway, a high-ranking official, seeking support. "If she brings me down, the whole system we've built will collapse," Jake argued. Callaway agreed to assist, but warned, "You're just a pawn. Don't disappoint me." Jake nodded, keeping his emotions in check. He knew he was entering a dangerous alliance, but he was willing to risk everything to maintain his power. With Callaway's backing, Jake started collaborating with local reporters eager for a sensational story. He fed them carefully crafted narratives. Lily was an outsider, clueless about the local community, imposing her will on the entire system. Jake didn't hesitate to imply that Lily was hunting officers to boost her image. Within days, articles began surfacing in minor news outlets, portraying Lily as an inexperienced leader disrupting the precinct with personal ambitions. The reports didn't outright accuse her of wrongdoing, but they planted seeds of doubt. Jake didn't realize he was merely a pawn in a larger game orchestrated by Callaway and his ilk. They didn't care about Jake's survival. He was a shield, a decoy to protect their greater interests. But Jake, blinded by arrogance, believed he was in control. Feeling cornered by mounting evidence against him, Jake escalated his efforts. He convinced Callaway to arrange a private meeting with a prominent judge, someone Callaway had helped climb the ranks. During the meeting, Jake made a bold offer: "Help me get out of this, and I'll make sure no investigation ever touches you." He even presented a carefully fabricated dossier suggesting that Lily had once suppressed crucial evidence in a past case. If the document were leaked, it could destroy her credibility in an instant. Callaway, sensing the situation's volatility, agreed to help, but set one condition: "You handle this yourself. If you fail, I want no part in it." Jake agreed. A few days later, the fabricated dossier was leaked to a major newspaper. The story exploded: Police Chief Lily Moore accused of suppressing evidence, the truth behind a decades-old case. The news sent shockwaves through the precinct and the public. Lily's supporters began to question her integrity, while her critics found new ammunition to attack her. Reporters swarmed the precinct, demanding a response from Lily. Meanwhile, Jake watched the chaos he had orchestrated from a distance, convinced he had delivered a decisive blow. She might be strong, but no one can withstand pressure from both the system and the public, Jake thought, a calculated smile spreading across his face. In the wake of Jake's smear campaign, the atmosphere in the precinct felt cloaked in a thick fog of suspicion and tension. Lily Moore, outwardly composed, was acutely aware that every move she made was being scrutinized. The articles targeting her spread rapidly, planting seeds of doubt even among officers who had silently supported her. But Lily remained steadfast. She understood that this was not just a battle against Jake Turner, but against a much larger network hiding behind him. Lily immediately recognized the orchestrated smear as part of Jake's plan. With the help of Chris and Thomas, she swiftly initiated an internal investigation to verify the authenticity of the dossier. Meanwhile, she addressed the media with a direct statement: "The truth doesn't need to be hidden. I'm ready to cooperate with any investigation to prove that this dossier is a fabrication." The investigation quickly revealed inconsistencies in the documents. Signatures had been expertly forged, and the data didn't match the original records. Lily even uncovered evidence that one of Jake's loyal officers had secretly accessed old files to create the fake evidence. With support from forensic experts, Lily presented the investigation's findings to the public, proving the dossier was nothing more than a carefully staged attempt to discredit her. "Jake Turner thinks he can manipulate justice," Lily declared in a press conference. "But justice is not so easily bent. The truth will always prevail, no matter how deeply it's buried." Late one evening, as Lily worked in her office, a soft knock interrupted her focus. She looked up to see Chris Meyer standing hesitantly at the door, his expression anxious. "Come in, Chris," Lily said, her tone reassuring. Chris stepped inside, clutching a thick file. "Chief, I think you need to see this," he said, his voice trembling. Frowning, Lily took the file from Chris. As she opened it, her eyes scanned pages filled with financial records, redacted internal memos, and printed email chains. The documents painted a clear picture: Jake wasn't acting alone. He was backed by a powerful group of individuals who had used their influence to cover up his misconduct for years. "Chris, where did you get this?" Lily asked, her gaze sharp. Chris swallowed hard, lowering his voice. "I found it in the archives. They think I'm just a rookie who doesn't know anything. But I overheard some conversations and got curious. I copied everything before they could clean it up." "Do you realize the danger you've put yourself in?" Lily asked, her tone serious. "I do," Chris replied, his eyes filled with determination. "But if you don't act on this, no one else will." Lily studied Chris for a long moment, sensing the internal struggle he had endured. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a glimmer of hope in the darkness of betrayal and corruption. Lily spent the entire night analyzing the documents Chris had provided. A horrifying picture emerged. Jake was the linchpin of a network involving officers and high-ranking officials, including members of the city administration. The emails revealed a coordinated effort to cover up everything from wrongful arrests to bribes taken from criminal enterprises. The documents also exposed the role of Mark Callaway, whom Jake had met with earlier. Callaway was not just a powerful official, but one of the main sponsors of these corrupt activities. He used his network to shield Jake, treating him as a tool to execute shady operations without leaving a trace. Lily felt a surge of anger, but also knew the fight now extended far beyond Jake Turner. She was confronting a system built on silence and complicity. The next day, Chris noticed he was being watched. He caught unfamiliar glances from his colleagues and received unexpected questions from officers who had never shown interest in him before. Jake had begun to suspect something. One evening, as Chris left the precinct, he spotted a strange car parked at the corner, its headlights glaring, engine idling. His heart pounded, but he maintained his composure and quickened his pace toward his car. As he unlocked the door, a voice called out from the shadows, "Be careful, Meyer. You don't know who you're messing with." Chris spun around, but saw no one. The car roared off, leaving him standing in the dark, cold sweat dripping down his temple. Lily knew she couldn't keep the findings secret for long. She called a meeting with her trusted team, including Deputy Chief Thomas Wright and a few other reliable officers. Presenting the documents Chris had uncovered, she emphasized the gravity of the situation. "This is no longer about one individual," Lily said firmly. "We're up against a system. But if we act strategically, we can dismantle it." Thomas nodded, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Do you have a plan?" "We're going public," Lily replied. "But not yet. First, I want more evidence. We have to ensure that when we strike, there's no room for anyone to cover it up. The next morning, as Lily Moore walked into the precinct, the atmosphere was different. Every eye turned to her, not with the usual respect or deference, but with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Whispered conversations seemed to echo down the hallways. Lily didn't need to ask, she knew something was happening. Thomas Wright, her deputy chief, hurried toward her with a grave expression. "Chief, you need to see this," he said, holding out a phone. On the screen was a freshly published article. The bold headline read, "New Leader Faces Troubled Past. Who is Lily Moore?" The article accused Lily of using personal connections to advance her career, insinuating that she had benefited from favoritism by her former mentor, Raymond Harris, who was now under investigation for corruption. The claims were carefully crafted, not entirely false, but not wholly accurate either, designed to mislead readers. Worse still, the article highlighted a past case Lily had handled years ago, pointing out her failure when key evidence went missing under her watch. Lily gripped the phone tightly, her eyes fixed on the screen. Though she was accustomed to the pressures of her job, this personal attack made it difficult to maintain her composure. She knew the article wasn't a coincidence. It was another move in Jake's plan. "We can issue an immediate rebuttal," Thomas said, his voice laced with concern. "I'll contact legal." "No," Lily replied firmly. "If we react now, it'll only amplify the story. I want to know who's behind this." Thomas nodded, though his worry was evident. "Lily, you know this won't stop here, don't you?" That evening, when Lily returned home, she sensed something was off. The living room window was slightly ajar, even though she distinctly remembered locking it before leaving. A feeling of unease crept over her. Lily stepped inside, instinctively resting her hand on the gun at her hip. On the kitchen table lay an old family photo. It was a picture of Lily as a child with her grandmother, Evelyn, a cherished keepsake from her childhood. But what sent a chill down her spine was the handwritten note on the back, "Don't forget what you've left behind." Lily looked around, but found no one. It was a clear threat, a deliberate message targeting her deepest vulnerabilities. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself, though her mind buzzed with questions. Who had done this, and how much did they know? The next morning, Lily called an emergency meeting with her trusted team. She laid the article on the table, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room. "Someone in this precinct has been talking to the press," she said, her voice low but commanding. "And if I find out who it is, there will be serious consequences." No one responded, but the tension in the room was palpable. A few officers avoided Lily's gaze. Chris Meyer, sitting in a corner, felt the weight of the moment, but knew he couldn't speak up just yet. After the meeting, Thomas entered Lily's office, holding a report. "We've traced the source of the article," he said. "It came from an anonymous tip within the precinct. And I'm afraid it's Jeff." Lily closed her eyes briefly, fighting back a wave of disappointment. Jeff, a senior officer she had believed she could trust, had betrayed her. Not only had he leaked information, but he had also inflated and distorted the truth to damage her. "Why?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. "Jake," Thomas replied. "I think Jake promised him something, maybe a promotion, or simply protection." In the days that followed, Lily faced a growing wave of criticism from both the media and some officers in the precinct. Whispered conversations grew louder, and skeptical glances became more obvious. The most painful part, however, was the isolation. While she still had allies like Chris and Thomas, Lily knew this battle wasn't just about reforming the system, it was about defending her reputation and regaining trust. Late one night, alone in her office, Lily stared out the window. The city lights sparkled, but she felt like she was standing in darkness. She recalled her grandmother Evelyn's words, "Justice isn't something you wait for, Lily. You have to fight for it, even if you have to fight alone." Taking a deep breath, her gaze hardened with determination. she knew she couldn't let Jake and those backing him win. But first, she needed to rebuild trust among her peers and confront the accusations head-on. Lily Moore sat in her office, the glow from her computer screen casting shadows on her tense face. The documents from the internal investigation lay before her, but her thoughts were consumed by the chaos outside. The barrage of articles attacking her was intensifying, and now, an even greater threat loomed. Jake Turner had just launched another insidious move. That morning, a video surfaced across social media and local news outlets. In the video, Jake sat in a dimly lit room, his face calm but tinged with bitterness. He introduced himself as an insider speaking out for justice. While he didn't attack Lily directly, he wove a series of carefully distorted stories that painted her as a tyrannical, incompetent leader, abusing her power to punish dissenters. "This isn't just about me," Jake said, staring straight into the camera. "This is about all the officers who have dedicated their lives to the force, only to be discarded like pawns. Lily Moore doesn't care about justice, she only cares about consolidating her power." The video spread rapidly, catching the attention of major media outlets. Some journalists began dubbing Jake a whistleblower, casting him as a central figure in a supposed fight against abuses of power by Lily. His stories lacked concrete evidence, but they were vague enough to sow doubt in the public's mind.